Eduardo Zetici could silence a room of hardened criminals with a single glare, but he couldn't get his 3 daughters to say a single syllable. He was the Don of the Zetici crime family, the tattooed king who ruled New York's underworld with an iron fist wrapped in Italian leather. But his greatest failure wasn't a botched hit or a federal investigation. It was 3 identical 2-year-old girls who had never spoken a word. Doctors called it developmental delay. Therapists whispered about attachment disorders. Eduardo called it his private torture. That silence shattered on a chaotic Wednesday afternoon at Rosso e Nero, when the most feared man in 5 boroughs lost control of his empire in front of a dining room full of witnesses. His triplets didn't cry for their father. They pointed 3 tiny fingers at a struggling waitress in a stained apron and screamed one word in perfect, devastating unison. "Mom." Before we go any further, comment where you're watching from. Let's see how many people are here with these girls tonight. The lunch rush at Rosso e Nero was in full swing. The upscale Italian restaurant humming with the clatter of silverware against fine china and the murmur of Manhattan's elite conducting business over $20 appetizers. Exposed brick walls lined with wine bottles worth more than most people's cars created an atmosphere of old-world elegance, while modern chandeliers cast golden light across white tablecloths. Alessia Angelo pushed through the kitchen doors, balancing a tray of dirty dishes on her hip. She was 26, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that carried the exhaustion of someone working 3 jobs to outrun debt. The Rosso e Nero gig was only 3 weeks old, a miracle, considering she'd been fired from her last 2 waitressing jobs for being too slow and too distracted. The tips here could finally put a dent in her late father's medical bills. She couldn't afford to lose this one. "Alessia!" Marco, the floor manager, grabbed her elbow with the grip of a man whose entire career depended on the next 5 minutes. His face had gone the color of old pasta. "Table 7. The booth in the back. You're taking it." Alessia's stomach dropped. "Why me? That's usually Veronica's." Veronica called in sick. "Convenient timing." Marco's eye twitched. "Listen to me very carefully. That table is Eduardo Zetici." "You know the name?" Everyone in New York knew the name. The Zetici family wasn't just connected, they were the connection. Import, export, construction, waste management. Eduardo Zetici was rumored to own more of the city than the city owned of itself. He was also a widower, rarely seen in public, and when he was, it was never good news for someone. "I've heard of him," Alessia whispered, her mouth suddenly dry. Then you know you don't look him in the eye unless he speaks first. You don't ask questions, you don't linger. Marco thrust a wine list into her hands. "And for God's sake, don't let those kids throw anything. Just survive the next hour, and I'll give you the weekend shifts." Alessia nodded, smoothing her apron with trembling hands, and stepped onto the floor. The restaurant's usual buzz had dropped to an uncomfortable hush. She could feel eyes tracking her as she approached table 7, tucked into a private alcove with a view of both exits, a position chosen by someone who never sat with his back exposed. And there he was, Eduardo Zetici at 34, looked like violence wrapped in Armani. He was broad-shouldered and coiled with the tension of a man perpetually ready to strike. His tailored black suit couldn't hide the tattoos crawling up his neck, intricate patterns that disappeared beneath his collar and emerged again at his wrists. His dark hair was swept back, and his face was all sharp angles and brutal beauty, with eyes so dark they looked black in the restaurant's dim lighting. A thin scar cut through his left eyebrow. This was a man who had killed people. Alessia was certain of it, but it wasn't Eduardo that made her heart clench. It was the 3 little girls, identical triplets, no more than 2 years old, sat in a custom triple high-chair contraption that looked like it cost more than her car. They wore matching pale yellow dresses with lace details, their blonde curls held back with tiny clips. Beautiful children. Angelic, even. Except they were currently in the throes of what could only be described as synchronized chaos. One was flinging peas across the table. Another was crying without sound, tears streaming down her cherubic face. The third was banging a silver spoon against her tray with the determination of a drummer in a heavy metal band. And Eduardo Setici, the man who allegedly once made a rival family head disappear for insulting his shoes, sat there looking utterly, completely defeated. Eduardo's hand shot out and caught Alessia's wrist before she could step back. His grip wasn't painful, but it was absolute, the hold of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice low and controlled, the kind of quiet that was more terrifying than shouting. I don't understand," Alessia stammered, her eyes darting to the triplets, who had gone eerily calm now, all three staring at her with identical expressions of desperate longing. "I've never seen them before, I swear." "Marco." Eduardo didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The floor manager appeared instantly, pale and sweating. "Clear the restaurant, now. Everyone out. Tell them there's a gas leak." "Sir, we have the Castellano party in the main room. They just ordered." "Now." Marco practically sprinted toward the kitchen. Within seconds, Alessia could hear the commotion. Confused protests, the scraping of chairs, the clatter of abandoned silverware. Two men in dark suits materialized from somewhere, flanking the exits, ushering bewildered diners toward the door with the kind of polite menace that didn't invite argument. "Please," Alessia whispered, trying to pull her wrist free. "I don't know what's happening. I'm just a waitress. Just a waitress." Eduardo's laugh was bitter, humorless. He stood, still holding her wrist, and gestured with his free hand to the triplets. Bella, or was it Elena, had grabbed the hem of Alessia's apron and was holding it like a lifeline, tears still wet on her face but silent now, waiting. "Just a waitress who my daughters who haven't spoken a single word in 2 years, recognize as their mother. That's impossible, I agree, which is why you're going to explain to me exactly what kind of game you're running." He pulled her closer, his face inches from hers, and she could smell expensive cologne mixed with something darker, cigar smoke maybe, or gunpowder. "Did someone send you? The Russos? The Bratva? How much did they pay you to train 3 toddlers to call you Mama?" "Nobody sent me." Alessia's voice cracked. "I don't even know who the Russos are. I've been working here 3 weeks. I've never even seen you before." One of the suited men approached. "Restaurant's clear, boss. Back exit secured." Eduardo nodded once, then turned back to Alessia. "You're coming with me. We're going to have a longer conversation somewhere more private. If this were you, right now, would you go quietly to protect the children, or run and risk everything? Tell me in the comments." "No." Alessia tried to dig her heels in, but Eduardo was already moving, pulling her toward the back of the restaurant where a private exit led to the alley. "No, you can't just kidnap me, I'll scream." "Go ahead." Eduardo's voice was almost bored. "We own the precinct captain, the building inspector, half the judges in Manhattan. Scream all you want." Terror seized Alicia's chest. She looked back desperately at the triplets. 2 men were already unbuckling them from their elaborate high chair, preparing to move them. Sophia reached out her small hands toward Alicia, her face crumpling, and Alessia felt something crack inside her chest. Some instinct she didn't understand, couldn't explain. "Don't hurt them," she heard herself say. Eduardo stopped, turned, studied her with those black, unreadable eyes. "They're my daughters. I don't hurt my children." "Then why are you hurting me?" For a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. Then the mask slammed back down. "Because you're a threat I don't understand yet. And I eliminate threats." The back door opened onto a rain-slicked alley where a black SUV with tinted windows idled, exhaust curling into the damp air. The vehicle was massive, clearly armored, with custom plates and the kind of aggressive elegance that screamed money and danger in equal measure. "Get in the car." Eduardo's tone left no room for negotiation. "And if I refuse?" "Then I carry you. Your choice. But either way, you're coming with me until I figure out what the hell you are." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more intimate than a threat should. "Witch, blackmailer, spy, or something worse. You made my daughters speak. That means you're either the answer I've been praying for, or the most dangerous person I've ever met." The rain was falling harder now, soaking through Alessia's thin uniform, plastering her hair to her face. Behind Eduardo, she could see the men carrying the triplets toward the SUV, the girl's eyes locked on her, wide and pleading, and somehow full of recognition that made absolutely no sense. She thought about running, about screaming, about fighting, but those three little faces stopped her. "Fine," she whispered. "I'll go. But I'm telling you, you're making a mistake." Eduardo opened the SUV door himself, a mockery of gentlemanly behavior. "That," he said softly, "is what I'm about to find out." The Zatici estate wasn't what Alicia expected. She'd imagined something from a movie. Marble statues, gaudy gold fixtures, tacky displays of wealth. Instead, the compound in Westchester was all modern lines and bulletproof glass, surrounded by walls that looked decorative but were clearly designed to keep armies out. The interior was minimalist, almost cold, decorated in blacks and grays with occasional splashes of color from expensive abstract art that Alessia suspected was either stolen or worth more than her entire life. They'd taken her to what Eduardo called the study, a massive room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a desk that could double as a dining table, and windows that overlooked manicured gardens lit by subtle landscape lighting. Rain still pattered against the glass. Two of Eduardo's men stood by the door, silent sentinels. The triplets had been whisked away by an older woman Eduardo called Gianna, the nanny, though not before all three had started crying the moment Alessia disappeared from view. The sound had followed her down the hallway like an accusation. Now she sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent, watching a thin man in his 60s set up what looked like a mobile laboratory on Eduardo's desk. Dr. Moreau had arrived within 20 minutes of their arrival, carrying a silver case and wearing the expression of someone who'd been summoned at gunpoint before and knew better than to ask questions. "This won't hurt," Dr. Moreau said, approaching Alessia with a swab. His accent was French, his manner clinical. "Just a cheek swab, and then one for each of the girls." "Wait," Alessia pulled back. "A DNA test? You think I'm, their biological mother? That's insane." "Then you have nothing to worry about." Eduardo stood by the window, silhouetted against the storm outside, arms crossed. He'd removed his suit jacket, revealing the full tapestry of tattoos covering his forearms, intricate patterns that looked like they told stories in a language Alessia didn't speak. If you're innocent, the test proves it. If you're not... He let the threat hang. Dr. Moreau swabbed Alessia's cheek with professional efficiency, then disappeared upstairs. She could hear the triplets crying even from 2 floors up, a sound that made her stomach twist with an anxiety she couldn't explain. Eduardo moved to his desk, poured 2 glasses of something amber from a crystal decanter, and slid one across to Alessia. drink. You look like you're about to pass out." "I don't want your whiskey. I want to go home." "Not until I get answers." He settled into the chair across from her, studying her like she was a puzzle he was determined to solve. "Start from the beginning. Your full name, where you're from, everything." Alessia's hands were shaking. She clasped them together in her lap. "Alessia Marie Angelo. I grew up in Queens. My mother died when I was 16. My father raised me alone until he got sick 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. He died last year, and the medical bills—" Her voice cracked. "The medical bills buried me. I've been working 3 jobs trying to dig out." Sympathetic story, conveniently tragic. Eduardo's expression didn't soften. "Keep going." "There's nothing to keep going with. I work at the restaurant. I work at a coffee shop in the mornings. I do data entry at night. That's my life. I don't have time for elaborate mafia blackmail schemes, and I definitely don't have 3 secret children." "Then explain why my daughters called you Mama." "I can't." The words burst out of her, frustrated and terrified. "I don't know. Maybe they saw me somewhere before. Maybe I look like someone they knew. Maybe it was just random. Kids say weird things. My daughters don't say anything." Eduardo leaned forward, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "That's the point. 2 years of specialists, 2 years of therapy, 2 years of silence. And then you walk by and they speak. So either you're exactly what you claim, a broke waitress who happened to trigger a miracle, or you're part of something calculated, and I don't believe in miracles." Alessia met his eyes, and for the first time, she saw past the threat to something else. Fear. This terrifying man was afraid. Afraid for his daughters, afraid of what she represented. "Wait," she said slowly, a memory surfacing. "When I was 21, 5 years ago, I donated eggs." Eduardo went very still. "What?" "I needed money for my dad's first round of treatment. There was this fertility clinic in Manhattan, very high-end. They paid $20,000 for donors who met specific criteria. Young, healthy, college-educated. I applied. They accepted me." The words were tumbling out now. "They harvested the eggs, paid me, and I signed papers saying I'd never contact any children born from the donation. They said it was anonymous. They said there was no way—" Dr. Moreau appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. His face was carefully neutral. "Results?" Eduardo's voice was sharp. The doctor approached, handed Eduardo the tablet. "The test was conclusive. I ran it twice to be certain." Eduardo stared at the screen, the color drained from his face. When he looked up at Alessia, his expression was something between shock and fury, and a grief so raw it made her chest ache. "Maternity confirmed," he said, his voice hollow. 99.9%. You're their biological mother." The room tilted. Alessia gripped the armrests of her chair. "That's impossible," she whispered. "They told me the donation failed. They said no viable embryos. They lied." Eduardo set the tablet down with carefully controlled violence. "Or someone lied, my wife." He stopped, started again. "My late wife told me she was pregnant. Carried them for 9 months. I watched her. She faked it." Alessia's voice was barely audible. Eduardo's silence was answer enough. He poured himself another drink, downed it in one swallow, and looked at Alessia with eyes full of something that might have been accusation or might have been desperation. "So now," he said quietly, "we have a problem." Eduardo left Alessia in the study under guard and disappeared into the east wing of the estate, a part of the house he rarely entered anymore. His late wife's bedroom suite had been sealed since her death 18 months ago, not out of grief, but out of a desire to forget. Their marriage had been arranged, a merger of families more than hearts, and Valentina Zatici had been as cold and calculating as the business deals that bound their families together. He stood in the doorway of her dressing room, surrounded by racks of designer clothes still wrapped in garment bags, shelves of shoes that had never been worn, and vanity tables covered in cosmetics worth more than most people's salaries. Everything preserved like a mausoleum to a woman who had valued appearance above all else. Eduardo moved to her desk, an ornate antique she'd shipped from Milan, and began opening drawers. He wasn't sure what he was looking for until he found it. A leather-bound journal tucked beneath a stack of society page clippings that featured Valentina's photo. Always Valentina, smiling for cameras, the perfect Mafia wife, the devoted mother. All of it a performance. He opened the journal. Her handwriting was elegant, controlled, just like everything else about her. March 15th. Eduardo wants children, an heir. He talks about legacy like it's the only thing that matters. But pregnancy, the thought makes my skin crawl. 9 months of swelling and sickness and losing control of my body. Then the damage afterward, the weight, the sagging, the stretch marks. I've worked too hard on this body to destroy it for his precious bloodline. Eduardo's jaw tightened. He flipped forward. April 3rd, I found a solution. A fertility clinic in Manhattan that specializes in discretion for high-profile clients. They can arrange everything. An egg donor who matches my coloring, a surrogate if needed. But Eduardo can never know. His pride wouldn't allow it. He needs to believe these children are mine, that I sacrificed for his family. The performance of pregnancy will be easy enough. Padding, careful photography. I'll deliver in a private clinic with doctors I control. He'll never question it. The words blurred. Eduardo sat down heavily in Valentina's chair, the journal trembling in his hands. He forced himself to keep reading. June 12th. The donor has been selected. Young, poor, desperate, perfect. Dark hair, similar bone structure. They showed me her photo. Pretty in a common sort of way. She'll never know what happens to her genetic material. The clinic assures me complete anonymity. $20,000 and a signature, and she disappears from the equation forever. $20,000. The exact amount Alessia said she was paid. Eduardo's vision tunneled. September 8th. The implantation was successful. Triplets. God help me, triplets. Eduardo is ecstatic. He sees it as a sign of his virility, his power. 3 daughters to marry off, 3 alliances to forge. He doesn't see the burden. But I'll manage. I always do. The girls will have nannies. I'll appear for photos and family dinners. Eduardo will get his heirs, and I'll get to remain myself. Eduardo slammed the journal shut, but the damage was done. He sat in the darkness of his dead wife's room, surrounded by her lies, and felt something crack inside his chest. Every moment of those pregnancies, every ultrasound he'd attended, every time he'd placed his hand on Valentina's stomach to feel the baby's kick, every proud smile he'd given her, all of it had been theater. She'd padded her dresses and hired actresses and doctors to maintain the illusion. And he'd believed it. He'd believed all of it. The triplets weren't Valentina's daughters. They were the children of a struggling waitress who'd sold her eggs to save her dying father. A woman who had no idea her genetic children existed until 3 toddlers pointed at her in a restaurant and called her mama. Some instinct had known. The girls had recognized their real mother on a cellular level that Eduardo's rational mind couldn't explain. He thought about Valentina's death. A car accident on the Taconic Parkway, driving too fast in the rain after an argument about his refusal to send the girls to boarding school in Switzerland. She'd wanted them gone by age 3. He'd refused. It was one of the few times he'd denied her anything. Maybe some part of him had known even then that something was wrong. The girls had been 15 months old when Valentina died, and they'd never cried at her funeral, never reached for her the way children reach for their mothers. They'd been more interested in Gianna, the nanny, than the woman who was supposed to have given them life. Because Valentina hadn't given them life. Alessia had. Eduardo stood, tucked the journal under his arm, and walked back through the silent halls of his estate. He could hear the triplets crying upstairs. They'd been inconsolable since Alessia had been taken away. Dr. Moreau had suggested sedatives. Eduardo had refused. He wouldn't drug his daughters just because they wanted their real mother. Their real mother, who was sitting terrified in his study, probably planning escape routes and wondering if she'd ever see daylight again. He found Alicia exactly where he'd left her. Though she'd moved to stand by the window, her arms wrapped around herself. She turned when he entered, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. "I want a lawyer," she said. Eduardo held up the journal. "Read this first." "I don't read it." His voice was gentler than it had been all night. "Please." Something in his tone made her take the journal. He watched her face as she read, saw the shock, the anger, the dawning horror of understanding. When she finished, she looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "She bought my eggs like I was livestock," Alicia whispered, "and then she threw away everything I would have given freely if anyone had just asked." "She threw away everything," Eduardo agreed. He moved to the window beside her, both of them reflected in the dark glass, including the truth. "My daughters have been living with a ghost for 18 months, but you—" He turned to face her. "You're real. You're the only real thing in their lives." "I don't know how to be a mother." "Neither do I," Eduardo said quietly. "But they know you. Somehow, they know." Upstairs, the crying had reached a fever pitch. The nursery was a war zone of pastel destruction. Toys lay scattered across plush carpeting, books torn from shelves, a toppled rocking chair blocking the doorway. In the center of the chaos, 3 identical little girls screamed with the kind of primal desperation that transcended language. Gianna, the nanny, a sturdy woman in her 50s who looked like she'd survived worse, was trying to comfort Sophia, but the child thrashed in her arms, reaching toward the door with grasping fingers. The moment Alessia stepped into the room, the screaming stopped. It was eerie, the sudden silence. 3 tear-stained faces turned toward her in unison, eyes wide and pleading. Then Bella launched herself forward with a toddler's reckless abandon, stumbling across the carpet with arms outstretched. Elena and Sophia followed, a small stampede of yellow dresses and desperate need. They hit Alessia's legs like tiny battering rams, clinging to her with a strength that seemed impossible for their size. Alessia stood frozen, these 3 strangers wrapped around her like she was their anchor in a storm. One of them, Elena, she thought, pressed her face against Alessia's hip and whispered it again, that word that had destroyed everything. "Mom." Alessia's knees buckled. She sank to the floor, and immediately all 3 girls were in her lap, touching her face, her hair, her hands, as if confirming she was real. Their crying had shifted to hiccuping sobs, then to something like contentment. Sophia stuck her thumb in her mouth and leaned against Alessia's chest. Bella played with the strand of Alessia's hair that had escaped her ponytail. Elena just stared at her with those solemn brown eyes, as if memorizing every feature. "They've been like this for 2 hours," Gianna said quietly from the doorway. Eduardo stood behind her, watching with an expression Alessia couldn't read. "The moment you left the building, they started screaming. Nothing calmed them, not bottles, not songs, not their favorite toys, Nothing. "How is this possible?" Alessia whispered. She was afraid to move, afraid to breathe too hard and shatter whatever fragile spell had settled over the room. "Biology," Eduardo said. He stepped over the toppled rocking chair and crouched beside them, his presence somehow both threatening and protective. Or instinct, or something science can't explain yet. But the fact is, they need you. They don't even know me. They know enough. He reached out and gently touched Sophia's curls, and the little girl turned to smile at him, a heartbreaking expression of trust. "I've tried everything. The best doctors, therapists, specialists from Switzerland and Japan, nothing worked. They were trapped in silence, and I was losing them. But you..." He looked at Alessia, and she saw the desperation behind his controlled facade. "You're the key I've been searching for." Alessia felt Bella's small hand pat her cheek, a gesture of comfort that should have come from adult to child, not the reverse. "So what happens now? You can't just keep me here." "I can." Eduardo's voice was matter-of-fact. "I can keep you here indefinitely. I own the police, the judges, half the politicians in the state. You have no family, no one who'll miss you badly enough to investigate. Your landlord will be compensated. Your jobs will be told you had a family emergency. You'll simply disappear." Terror clawed at Alessia's throat. That's kidnapping. That's reality. He stood, moved to the window where rain still streaked the glass. "But I'm not a monster. I'm offering you a choice, a deal." "What kind of deal?" Eduardo turned back to face her, and in the soft light of the nursery, surrounded by the detritus of childhood, he looked less like a Mafia don and more like a desperate father. "Stay. Live here. Be their mother, the role they clearly need you to fill. In exchange, every debt you have disappears. The medical bills, the credit cards, all of it. Gone. You'll have a room in this house, a salary that makes your 3 jobs look like pocket change, and anything you need. Be honest. Is this protection or captivity? Comment your opinion. There's no right answer here." "A gilded cage," Alessia said bitterly. "A purpose," Eduardo corrected. "How many people get to change 3 lives? Save 3 children who are drowning in silence? And if I refuse?" His expression hardened. "Then I keep you anyway, but without the luxury of pretending it's your choice. I meant what I said. They need you. I will do whatever it takes to give my daughters what they need. Even if that makes me the villain in your story." Alessia looked down at the 3 little girls in her lap. Sophia had fallen asleep against her chest, her breathing finally even and peaceful. Bella was still playing with her hair, humming a tuneless melody. Elena met her gaze with those ancient eyes and did something that broke Alessia's heart. She smiled. A real smile, bright and trusting and full of a love that shouldn't exist yet but somehow did. These were her daughters. Not by choice, not by intent, but by biology and fate and a desperate choice she'd made 5 years ago to save her father. Some part of her had made them, and now some part of them was calling her home. "I want my own room," Alessia said quietly. "Not sharing space with you or anyone else. And I want to be able to leave the estate sometimes. Supervised if you insist, but I won't be completely imprisoned." Eduardo's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Agreed. And if I do this, I'm doing it for them. Not for you, not for your money. For these 3 little girls who deserve better than the ghost of a mother who never wanted them." "I understand." Alessia took a shaky breath. "Then yes, I'll stay. But the moment you hurt them, the moment you use them as leverage or weapons in your Mafia games, I will find a way to take them from you. DNA or not, deal or not. Are we clear?" Eduardo crossed the room and extended his hand. "Crystal." She shook it, and felt the trap close around her with the softness of a velvet glove and the finality of prison bars. But when Elena leaned up and kissed her cheek, whispering, "Mum," one more time before yawning, Alessia thought maybe some cages were worth entering, even if you could never leave. Alessia had been in the Zatici compound for 5 days, and she was beginning to understand that luxury was just another form of prison. Her room was 3 times the size of her queen's apartment, with a king bed draped in Egyptian cotton, a marble bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in, and a walk-in closet that had been stocked, without her permission, with designer clothes in her exact size. She hated all of it. "You can't wear that to breakfast," Eduardo said from the doorway of the dining room, his tone flat with disapproval. Alessia looked down at her jeans and simple t-shirt, clothes she'd insisted on keeping from her old life. "Why not? I'm feeding toddlers, not attending the Met Gala. You're living in my house now." There are standards. He was already dressed for the day in another immaculate suit, his tattoos hidden except for the dark lines creeping above his collar. Everything about him screamed control and power. "Gianna left appropriate options in your closet." "You mean the parade of dresses that cost more than I used to make in a month? I'm not wearing those to get covered in oatmeal and apple juice." Alessia moved to the high chairs where the triplets were already seated, their faces lighting up the moment they saw her. "Good morning, girls." "Mum," Sophia said, banging her hands on her tray with delight. It was still the only word any of them spoke, but they said it constantly now, like they were making up for 2 years of silence. Eduardo took his seat at the head of the table, watching Alessia with those dark, calculating eyes. "You're teaching them bad habits. I'm feeding them breakfast. You're letting them throw food. Bella just put a handful of scrambled eggs in her hair." "She's 2 years old, Eduardo. 2-year-olds throw food. It's literally what they do." Alessia wiped Bella's hands with a napkin, earning a giggle. "When was the last time you actually sat with them during a meal?" His jaw tightened. "I have responsibilities." "So do they. They're children. They need their father, not a ghost who shows up to criticize and disappears to make business calls." She hadn't meant to snap, but 5 days of walking on eggshells had worn her patience thin. "You brought me here to help them. Let me help." "I brought you here because they won't stop screaming when you leave." Eduardo set down his coffee cup with controlled precision. "Don't confuse that with giving you authority over how I run my household. Then maybe you should run your household better." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Eduardo stood slowly, and Alessia was reminded viscerally that this was a man who killed people for a living. But she refused to back down, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said quietly. "I know that those 3 little girls barely recognize you. I know that when you walk into a room, they don't run to you like children should run to their father. They're afraid of you." "They're not afraid." "Then why does Sophia cry when you pick her up? Why does Elena hide behind my legs when you raise your voice? Why does Bella only smile at you when I'm standing right next to her?" Alessia moved to stand between Eduardo and the high chairs, a human shield. "You want to be their father. Then be soft with them. Be present. Stop treating them like business assets and start treating them like they're the most important thing in your world." For a long moment, Eduardo just stared at her. Then, to her surprise, his shoulders dropped slightly. He looked past her to the triplets, who were watching the exchange with wide, uncertain eyes. "I don't know how," he said finally, so quietly she almost missed it. The admission cost him. Alessia could see it in the way he turned slightly away, the muscle ticking in his jaw. This man, who commanded armies and controlled territory and inspired fear in hardened criminals, didn't know how to be gentle with his own daughters. "Then learn," Alessia said, her voice softer now. "Start small, sit with them, don't hover, don't correct, just be here." Eduardo moved slowly, like he was approaching wild animals, and lowered himself into the chair beside Bella's high chair. The little girl watched him suspiciously, a piece of toast clutched in her fist. He reached out, hesitated, then gently touched her hand. Bella didn't pull away, but she didn't respond either, just studied him with those solemn brown eyes all three girls had inherited from God knew where. "What do I say to her?" Eduardo asked. "Anything. Tell her about your day, tell her she looks pretty. Tell her you love her. I'm not good at—" "Try." Eduardo cleared his throat. You have nice curls today, Bella." Bella blinked at him. Then, miracle of miracles, she held out her toast to him, a toddler's offering of peace. Eduardo took it with the same careful reverence he might handle a loaded gun. "Thank you." The moment stretched. Then Elena, emboldened by her sister's bravery, reached across and patted Eduardo's tattooed hand. Sophia giggled and threw a piece of banana. Whether at him or in celebration, Alessia couldn't tell. "This is ridiculous," Eduardo muttered, but Alessia noticed he was smiling. Just barely, just a quirk at the corner of his mouth, but it was there. They settled into an awkward rhythm. Alessia served breakfast, refusing the staff's help because she needed to feel useful, while Eduardo sat with the girls, attempting conversation and mostly getting stares and food-throwing in response. It was chaotic and messy, and nothing like the formal dining Alessia suspected usually happened in this house. It was also the most human she'd seen Eduardo Zetici since they'd met. 2 hours later, after baths and a wardrobe change for everyone involved, the girls were playing in the nursery. Alessia was building a tower with blocks while Eduardo watched from the doorway, still keeping his distance. Elena carefully placed a block on top, her tongue poking out in concentration, and the tower promptly collapsed. All three girls burst into laughter, real, bright, joyful laughter that filled the room like music. And then Sophia looked up at Alessia, then at Eduardo, and said something new. "Happy." The word hung in the air. Alessia's breath caught. Eduardo stepped fully into the room, his expression stunned. "Did she just happy?" Sophia repeated, nodding. She pointed at Alessia. "Mom, happy." Then she pointed at Eduardo, and after a moment's consideration smiled. "Papa, happy." Eduardo dropped to his knees beside his daughters, and for the first time since Alessia had met him, she saw his mask completely crack. His hands shook as he pulled all three girls into his arms, and when he looked up at Alessia, his eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "They called me Papa," he whispered. Alessia nodded, her own throat tight. "You're learning." The leak happened on a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after Alessia had moved into the compound. Eduardo was in his office reviewing shipping manifests when his phone lit up with a message from his consigliere. "Vincent, we have a problem. Check the Sentinel." The New York Sentinel was a tabloid that survived on gossip, scandal, and the occasional truth that slipped through the cracks of the city's criminal underworld. Eduardo pulled up their website and felt ice slide down his spine. The headline read, "Mafia Don's secret baby mama moves into love nest." Below it, a grainy telephoto shot of Alessia in the estate gardens, pushing the triplets on swings, her face partially obscured but recognizable enough. The article was vague on details but heavy on speculation. Questions about who she was, where she'd come from, whether the late Valentina Zetici had known about her husband's mistress. It painted Alessia as either a homewrecker or a gold digger, and the triplets as potentially illegitimate. Eduardo's phone rang. Vincent didn't bother with pleasantries. Marco's been talking, to the families, to the press, to anyone who'll listen. He's saying the girls aren't Valentina's biological daughters, that you've installed some random woman to play house and destabilize the succession. Marco needs to remember his place. His place is underboss, which means he has influence, and right now he's using it to paint Alessia as a threat. Vincent's voice was grim. You need to control this narrative before it controls you. Eduardo ended the call and went to find Alessia. She was in the library, reading to the triplets from an oversized picture book. All three girls crowded in her lap like puppies. The scene was so domestic, so normal, that it took him a moment to remember the danger circling just beyond their walls. "We need to talk," he said. Alessia looked up, immediately sensing something wrong. "Girls, why don't you go play with your blocks? I'll be right back." The triplets protested, but eventually scattered to their toy corner. Alessia followed Eduardo into the hallway, her arms crossed defensively. What happened? He showed her the article, the color drained from her face. How did they... Someone talked. Someone always talks. Eduardo pocketed his phone. The question is who benefits from this getting out, and the answer is Marco Russo. Your underboss? My ambitious, opportunistic underboss who's been waiting for any sign of weakness to make his move. Eduardo's voice was hard. He's spreading rumors that you're a planted operative, an assassin sent by a rival family to get close to me and my daughters. He's using the fact that you appeared out of nowhere and the girl's parentage is questionable to undermine my authority. That's insane. That's Mafia politics. Eduardo ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. It doesn't matter if it's true. What matters is whether the families believe it. And right now, you're an unknown variable. That makes you dangerous. Alessia's laugh was bitter. I'm dangerous? I'm a waitress who got kidnapped into playing mother. I'm not exactly a threat to anyone. You're a threat to the status quo, and in my world, that's enough to get you killed. The words hung heavy between them. Before Alessia could respond, a crash echoed from the second floor, glass shattering, followed immediately by the triplets' screams. Eduardo ran. Alessia was right behind him. They burst into the nursery to find Gianna already scooping up Sophia and Elena, while Bella stood frozen by the window, staring at the brick lying in a pile of broken glass on the carpet. A piece of paper was tied to it with wire. Eduardo grabbed the brick, careful not to touch it with bare hands. He unwrapped the note and his expression went murderous. "What does it say?" Alessia demanded, pulling Bella into her arms. Eduardo's voice was deadly calm. "False queen's bleed. If someone threatened your children like this, what would you do next? Tell me in the comments." The threat was clear. Someone, Marco or his people, was willing to target the children to make a point. Alessia felt Bella trembling against her chest, and something fierce and primal rose in her throat. These were her daughters. Biology or not, choice or not, they were hers. And someone had just threatened them. "What do we do?" she asked. Eduardo looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him making calculations, running through scenarios with the cold efficiency of a general planning for war. When he spoke, his words were measured but absolute. "We get married." Alessia blinked. "Excuse me? You're vulnerable because you have no legal claim to be here, no official status. You're just a woman living in my house, which makes you an easy target." He moved closer, his presence overwhelming but somehow steadying. "But if you're my wife, if you carry the Zatici name, You're under my family's protection. Anyone who touches you touches me. Anyone who threatens you declares war on my entire organization. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. It's the only way to keep you alive." Eduardo glanced at the broken window, at the brick with its bloody promise. "Marco is testing me. He wants to see if I'll protect you or throw you to the wolves. If I marry you, I send a message that you're untouchable, that the triplets' legitimacy is unquestionable, that anyone who challenges this ends up in the river." Alessia's mind was racing. A fake marriage. Does it matter if it's fake? The legal protections are real. The message to my enemies is real. He stepped closer. "I'm not asking you to love me, Alessia. I'm asking you to let me keep you alive." She looked down at Bella, who had stopped crying and was clinging to her with desperate trust. Across the room, Sophia and Elena were reaching for her, calling Mum in voices that broke and rebuilt her heart simultaneously. "If I do this," Alessia said slowly, "I want a prenup that guarantees me custody of the girls if anything happens to you. I want legal protections of my own, not just yours." Eduardo's eyes flickered with something that might have been respect. "Done. And I want you to promise that this is about their safety, not your control, that you're not using them to trap me." "I promise." He held out his hand. "But we need to move fast. The wedding needs to happen within the week, before Marco can make another move." Alessia stared at his outstretched hand, tattooed, scarred, the hand of a killer and a father. Then she thought about the note. "False queens bleed." Someone wanted her dead or gone. Someone wanted to take these 3 little girls and use them as pawns in a power struggle. She took Eduardo's hand. "1 week," she said, "but I'm wearing whatever dress I want. I'm not becoming someone else just because I'm becoming your wife." Eduardo's smile was sharp as a knife. "I wouldn't expect anything less." The shooting range was in the basement of the estate, soundproofed and climate-controlled, lined with targets at varying distances. Eduardo had insisted they come down here the morning after the brick incident, claiming that if Alessia was going to be his wife, fake or not, she needed to know how to defend herself and the girls. Alessia stood at the firing line, staring at the handgun on the table in front of her like it might bite. "I've never even held a gun before. That's why we're here." Eduardo moved behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He picked up the Glock 19, checked the chamber with practiced efficiency, and held it out to her. "Take it. Get used to the weight." She took the gun with both hands, surprised by how heavy it was. "This feels wrong." "It should. A gun isn't a toy. It's a tool for ending lives." His voice was matter-of-fact, clinical. "But in the right hands, at the right moment, it's also the tool that saves them. Your hands, the girls' lives." That changed something in Alessia's grip. She adjusted her fingers, trying to find a hold that felt more secure. "Not like that." Eduardo moved closer, and suddenly he was pressed against her back, his arms coming around her to adjust her position. His hands covered hers, warm and calloused, repositioning her fingers on the grip. Dominant hand here, support hand wrapped around, firm but not strangling it. The gun needs to become an extension of your arm, not something you're fighting. Alessia's breath caught. She could smell his cologne, something expensive and dark with notes of cedar, mixed with the underlying scent that was just him. His chest was solid against her shoulder blades, his breath warm against her ear as he spoke. "Your stance is wrong too. Feet shoulder-width apart." He used his leg to nudge her feet into position, his thigh brushing against hers. "Weight slightly forward. You want to lean into the recoil, not let it push you back." There's a lot of rules for pointing and shooting, Alessia said, trying to keep her voice steady. There's a lot of ways to get yourself killed by doing it wrong. His hands slid from her hands to her shoulders, adjusting her posture. Arms extended but not locked, elbows slightly bent. You're going to feel the recoil through your whole body. Don't fight it. Accept it and recover. He stepped back, leaving a cold space where his warmth had been. Alessia immediately missed it, which was insane. This was Eduardo Zatici, a man who'd kidnapped her, blackmailed her into marriage, and ruled a criminal empire. She shouldn't be noticing how his hands felt on her body, or how his voice dropped to something almost intimate when he was teaching her. Now, sight the target. Eduardo's voice was back to business. Line up the front sight post with the rear sights. Focus on the front sight, not the target. Your eye will want to focus on the threat, but trust the sights to guide the bullet. Alessia squinted down the barrel at the paper target 15 feet away, a simple silhouette of a human torso. Her arms were already shaking from holding the gun extended. Relax, Eduardo murmured, moving close again. His hand settled on the small of her back, steadying. Breathe in, let half of it out. Squeeze the trigger on the exhale, don't jerk it. Squeeze slowly, like you're trying not to wake the girls. She followed his instructions, breathed in, let it out halfway. Squeezed. The gun kicked in her hands, the report deafening even through the ear protection. The recoil shoved her backward into Eduardo's chest, and his arm immediately wrapped around her waist, stabilizing her. Good, he said, and she could hear the approval in his voice. Look at the target. She'd hit it. Barely. The shot had caught the edge of the silhouette's shoulder, but she'd hit it. Again, Eduardo said. His arm was still around her waist, and he didn't seem in a hurry to move it. Empty the magazine. Get comfortable with the noise and the kick. Then we'll work on accuracy. They spent the next hour like that. Eduardo pressed close, his voice low and patient, guiding her through the mechanics of shooting. His hands on her hips, adjusting her stance. His fingers over hers, correcting her grip. His breath on her neck when he leaned in to check her sight picture. By the time the session ended, Alessia had gone through 3 magazines and was hitting center mass more often than not. Her arms ached. Her ears rang despite the protection, and she was hyper-aware of every point where Eduardo's body had touched hers. You're a natural, Eduardo said, taking the gun from her and setting it on the table. He pulled off his ear protection and she did the same. The silence felt too loud. A few more sessions and you'll be able to protect yourself if Marco's people come again. I don't want to have to shoot anyone, Alessia said quietly. Neither do I. But wanting something and being prepared for the alternative are 2 different things. Eduardo turned to face her fully, and there was something in his expression she'd never seen before. Something almost vulnerable. When that brick came through the window, when I saw you standing there with Bella in your arms, I realized something. What? That this stopped being about the girls weeks ago. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. I brought you here because they needed you. But somewhere between the DNA test and the breakfast battles and watching you read them stories, I started needing you too. Alessia's heart was hammering harder than it had when she'd fired the gun. Eduardo, I know this wasn't your choice. I know I forced you into this marriage to protect you. But if I'm being honest, he stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. I'm not just protecting a nanny anymore, or even just the mother of my children. I'm protecting someone He broke off, shook his head. Someone I care about, more than I should. The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. Alessia didn't know what to say. She'd spent 3 weeks hating this man, resenting her captivity, planning escape routes she'd never used because of 3 little girls who called her mom. But somewhere in the chaos of co-parenting and negotiating this strange new life, something had shifted. She'd stopped seeing just the monster. She'd started seeing the man. "I care about them," she said finally. "Your daughters. Our daughters." She paused. "And I'm starting to care about you too, which terrifies me." Eduardo's smile was slow, genuine, transforming his face into something almost beautiful. "Good. Terror means you're paying attention." He held out his hand. "Come on. The girls will be waking from their nap soon, and they get cranky if we're both not there." Alessia took his hand and let him lead her back upstairs, back to the life she'd never chosen but was starting to claim as her own. The engagement party was everything Alessia had dreaded. 200 of New York's most dangerous people gathered in the Zadici Estates ballroom, dressed in designer labels and carrying concealed weapons, pretending to celebrate a love story that had started with kidnapping. Crystal chandeliers threw prismatic light across marble floors. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner. Champagne flowed like water, and everyone smiled with too many teeth. Alessia wore a midnight blue gown that Gianna had insisted on, her hair swept up in a style that made her look like someone else. Eduardo stood beside her in a tuxedo that probably cost more than her old car, his hand resting possessively on her lower back as they greeted guests. To the outside world, they looked like a powerful couple in love. Only Alessia could feel the tension coiled in Eduardo's muscles, the way his eyes constantly scanned the room for threats. "Smile," he murmured in her ear. "You look like you're attending a funeral." "I might be," she whispered back. "Half these people look like they want to kill me. Only a quarter. The rest are just curious." His grip tightened slightly. "Marco's here, 3 o'clock, by the bar." Alessia glanced over and found the underboss watching them with cold calculation. Marco Russo was handsome in a serpentine way, slicked back hair, expensive suit, smile that never reached his eyes. He raised his champagne glass in a mocking toast. "I don't trust him," Alessia said. "Good instincts." Eduardo's jaw was tight. "Stay close to me tonight. Don't go anywhere alone." But 20 minutes later, Gianna appeared with an apologetic expression and whispered that Sophia was crying for her mama. The nanny had tried everything, but the little girl had worked herself into hysterics and was making herself sick. "I'll just be upstairs for a few minutes," Alessia told Eduardo. "I'll come with you. You can't abandon your own engagement party. These people are here to see you." She touched his arm. "I'll be fine. Your guards are everywhere." Eduardo looked torn but nodded. 10 minutes. If you're not back, I'm coming up." Alessia slipped through the crowd and up the grand staircase, her heels clicking on marble. The second floor was quieter, insulated from the party noise below. She could hear Sophia's crying from down the hall, heartbroken sobs that made her chest ache. She quickened her pace. The nursery door was ajar. Gianna should have been there, but the room was dark except for the nightlight that cast dancing shadows across the walls. Alessia's instincts screamed warning, but Sophia's crying pulled her forward. She pushed the door open fully. "Sophia, baby, I'm here." The crying stopped abruptly. Too abruptly. Alessia's hand flew to the light switch, but nothing happened. The power was out. In the dim glow from the hallway, she could see the triplets in their beds, wide awake and silent, staring at something behind her. She spun around as the door slammed shut. 2 men in dark clothes emerged from the shadows. One grabbed her arms while the other locked the door. Alessia screamed and fought, her self-defense training from Eduardo kicking in. She stomped on an instep, drove her elbow backward into a stomach, twisted free. "Eduardo!" Her voice was raw. "Eduardo!" But the ballroom was 3 floors down, and the power outage had likely cut the security systems. No one was coming, not fast enough. More footsteps thundered up the stairs. She could hear shouts from below, Eduardo's voice bellowing her name. But between her and rescue were Marco's men, and they were coming through that door in seconds. Alessia ran to the triplets' beds. All 3 girls were crying now, silently, tears streaming down their faces. She grabbed the nearest thing she could use as a weapon, a heavy wooden rocking chair, and dragged it in front of the door. Then she pulled the girls from their beds, herding them into the corner farthest from the entrance, putting her body between them and the threat. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice shook. "Mama's here. I won't let anyone hurt you." The door handle rattled. Someone threw their weight against it. The rocking chair skidded backward an inch. Another impact, and the wood began to splinter. Alessia remembered the gun Eduardo had shown her, the one he'd made her practice with. He'd told her there was one in every room of the house, hidden but accessible. Her eyes scanned frantically. There, the bookshelf. He'd mentioned the 3rd shelf, behind the copy of The Prince. She lunged for it, grabbed the book, found the concealed compartment. Her fingers closed around cold metal just as the door crashed open. Marco Russo stepped through, flanked by 3 men with guns drawn. He looked calm, almost amused, as he surveyed the scene. Alessia crouched in front of 3 terrified toddlers, a pistol shaking in her hands. "The waitress wants to play soldier," Marco said. "How charming. Get away from my daughters." Alessia's voice was steadier than she felt. "Your daughters?" Marco laughed. "They're not yours. They're not even really his. They're genetic accidents from a lying wife, and they're in the way of the natural succession." He gestured to his men. "Remove her. Kill the children. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong." Everything slowed down. Alessia saw the men raise their weapons. She heard Bella whimper behind her. She thought about Eduardo teaching her to shoot, his hands guiding hers, his voice in her ear. Breathe, aim, squeeze. She fired. The shot went wide. Adrenaline made her hands shake. But it was enough to make Marco's men dive for cover. In that split second, Eduardo burst through the shattered doorway like an avenging angel, his own gun drawn, his face a mask of murderous rage. "You touch my family," Eduardo snarled, "and I'll bury you alive." What followed was controlled chaos. Eduardo's security team flooded the hallway. Gunshots cracked through the air. Marco's men fell or fled. Marco himself tried to run, but Eduardo caught him by the throat and slammed him against the wall with brutal efficiency. "You came into my house," Eduardo growled, his forearm across Marco's windpipe. "You threatened my children. You tried to kill the woman I love." Marco clawed at Eduardo's arm, gasping. "She's nobody. She's everything." Eduardo's voice dropped to something lethal. "And you just signed your death warrant." Alessia didn't see what happened next. She was too busy gathering the triplets into her arms, checking them frantically for injuries, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. They clung to her, all 3 crying, "Mom, Mom, Mom," in a heartbroken chorus. Then Eduardo was there, kneeling beside them, his hands gentle despite the blood on his knuckles. "Are you hurt? Any of you?" "We're okay," Alessia managed. "Scared, but okay." He pulled all 4 of them into his arms, and for a moment the feared Don of the Zatici family was just a father holding his family, shaking with relief and rage and something that looked like love. "I've got you," he whispered into Alessia's hair. "All of you. I've got you." And for the first time since this nightmare began, Alessia believed him. The estate was quiet in the way that only comes after violence, a held breath, waiting to see if the danger has truly passed. Marco's body had been removed with the clinical efficiency Eduardo's men were known for. The engagement party had scattered like startled birds. Police wouldn't come because police didn't come to Zetici properties unless invited, and they wouldn't be invited. Alessia sat in Eduardo's private bathroom while he knelt in front of her with a first aid kit, cleaning the scrapes on her arms from where Marco's men had grabbed her. His hands were surprisingly gentle, daubing antiseptic on her bruised wrists with a cotton pad. Neither of them had spoken since the triplets had finally fallen asleep in their beds, all three girls piled together like puppies, refusing to let go of the stuffed animals Alessia had tucked around them. "You should have stayed at the party," Eduardo said finally, his voice rough. Sofia was crying. "It was a recording. Marco had one of his men play it through the baby monitor to lure you upstairs." His jaw clenched. "I should have known. I should have anticipated. You can't predict everything." Alessia winced as he pressed a butterfly bandage over a cut on her forearm. "You got there in time. That's what matters." "I almost didn't." He looked up at her, and his eyes were haunted. "When I heard you scream, when I realized the power was cut and you were up there alone with them, I've never been that afraid in my life. Not when I took over the family. Not when Valentina died. Not ever." Alessia reached out and cupped his face with her uninjured hand. "But we're okay, all of us, because you taught me how to defend them. You were magnificent." Something like wonder crept into his voice. "You stood between them and armed men with nothing but a gun you'd barely learned to use. You didn't hesitate. You didn't run. You became exactly what they needed, a mother who would die before letting anyone hurt her children." "Our children," Alessia corrected softly. Eduardo set down the antiseptic and took both her hands in his, careful of her injuries. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to know I mean it, that it's not about the danger or the adrenaline or gratitude. Eduardo, this marriage we're planning, this arrangement to keep you safe, it's not fake anymore. Maybe it never was, not really." He stood, pulling her up with him, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. "When Marco said I claimed you were the woman I loved, I told him he was wrong. But he wasn't. I do love you, Alessia. I love the way you fight for the girls. I love how you call me out when I'm being an ass. I love that you wore jeans to breakfast and refused to become someone else just because you moved into my world." Alessia's breath caught. "You kidnapped me. I did. I forced you into this life, and if I could go back, I'd—" He stopped, shook his head. "No, I'd do it again. Because the alternative is a world where I never met you, where my daughters never spoke, where I never learned what it feels like to love someone so much that the thought of losing them stops your heart. You're terrible at romance," Alessia said, but she was smiling through tears she hadn't realized were falling. "You know that, right? I'm a work in progress." He pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "But I'm asking anyway. Will you marry me? Not because I'm forcing you. Not because the girls need you. But because I need you. Because I want to spend the rest of my life learning how to be the man you deserve." Alessia thought about the past month. The terror, the confusion, the gradual melting of her resistance. She thought about 3 little girls who'd recognized her on a cellular level, who called her mom like it was the most natural thing in the world. She thought about this dangerous, broken man who was learning to be soft, learning to be present, learning to love. "Yes," she whispered, "but I have conditions." Eduardo laughed, the sound rough but genuine. Of course you do. No more kidnapping, no more decisions made without consulting me, and you have to tell me you love me at least once a day, even when I'm being difficult. Especially when you're being difficult. He cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. Ti amo, Alicia. Today, tomorrow, and every day after. I love you too, she said, and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative. Two people learning each other's rhythms. Then Eduardo's hands slid into her hair, and the kiss deepened, became something more, a promise, a claiming, a beginning rather than an end. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. The girls will be up soon, Alessia said. Let them sleep. They've had a traumatic night. Eduardo laced his fingers through hers. Come with me. I want to show you something. He led her downstairs and out into the garden, where dawn was just breaking over the horizon. The estate grounds were beautiful in the early morning light, manicured lawns, rose bushes beginning to bloom. A fountain that caught the sun and threw it back in diamonds. This is where I want to have the wedding, Eduardo said. Nothing huge, just family, just people who matter. The girls can be flower girls and you can wear whatever makes you happy, and we'll mean every word of the vows. Alessia looked around the garden, imagining it. The vision wasn't hard to conjure. White chairs set up on the lawn, the triplets in matching dresses scattering petals. Eduardo, in a suit, waiting for her with that small smile he reserved only for her and the girls. It's perfect, she said. A door banged open behind them. They turned to see Jana leading 3 pajama-clad toddlers onto the patio, the girls rubbing sleep from their eyes. The moment they spotted Alessia and Eduardo, their faces transformed. Mom! Sophia shrieked with pure joy. Papa! Elena added, the word still new enough to make Eduardo's expression crack with emotion. Bella, always the thoughtful one, studied them for a moment. Then she smiled, a brilliant sunshine smile, and said something that made everything else fall away. Happy. All 3 girls ran across the lawn on unsteady toddler legs, launching themselves at Eduardo and Alessia with reckless abandon. Eduardo caught Bella and Sophia, while Alessia scooped up Elena. And they stood there in the morning light, this impossible patchwork family built from tragedy and DNA and something that looked a lot like fate. Happy, Bella repeated, patting Eduardo's cheek. Then she pointed between him and Alessia with a child's absolute certainty. Love. Eduardo looked at Alessia over the girls' heads, his eyes bright with tears he'd probably deny later. She's right, you know, out of the mouths of babes. Alessia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Eduardo leaned across the girls and kissed her again, slower this time, sweeter. The kiss of a man who knew he was exactly where he belonged. When he pulled back, he was smiling. Not the controlled expression he showed the world, but something real and unguarded and beautiful. 3 little words, he murmured. 3 little girls, Alessia added. One family, they said together, and it felt like a vow,